Hello and welcome back to this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Friends, a couple of weeks ago, actually probably like 2 months ago, we talked about the show Neon Genesis Evangelion. And I'd only watched a couple of episodes at that point, but already gotten a real feel for the show, at least for the first third of the show. And we had a great conversation about child soldiers and trauma and all the things that went into it. I've now finished the show and watched the movie, and we're going to be talking about the ending and the show in general, but there's just a lot of stuff that comes up with the ending, or I should say endings, because quite famously, as fans of the show will already know, but if you don't worry about it. You don't have to have seen the show to enjoy the conversation. There was an ending in the show that a lot of people were very unsatisfied by, and if you think hating in fandom is isolated to Marvel and Star Wars, I've got bad news for you. Apparently, the producer and director and staff got death threats and got all kinds of, of course, there's probably a lot of just legitimate, hey, I didn't love this, but also a lot of terrible stuff. And so they released a movie that had
their studio was graffitied.
Oh God. Yeah, and so there was a movie that was issued that had a completely different ending that can be canonically understood as part of that, or as an alternate universe, or as a who the hell knows. And then there has now been like dozens of video games and comic books and other things, including other movies, that offer different endings or different alternate universes, or just take these characters and put them in completely different settings. So it's quite a story, both in front of the screen and behind the screen. And it raises a lot of interesting questions that we love to talk about, both in terms of what they're doing in the story and in all the stuff that happened behind the screens. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to dive into some of the interesting questions that it raises. And I'm just looking forward to this. And so, Riki, let me just start. I think we're going to start by focusing on the on-screen stories and then get into later how it, like all the stuff that happened back screen and why the creators may have done what they did. But let me just start with, what's your understanding of the ending of the series?
Okay, so let's be clear here. There was a 26 episode TV series, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I believe ran 1996, 95, 96.
Yeah, it sounds
and
right.
then the fan backlash happened in 1997. They released the movie The End of Evangelion, which is
right.
what we're going to reference as the movie / second ending. And then there was a series of movies in what is called the Rebuild of Evangelion arc, I guess, 1.0,
Right.
2.0, 3.0, and they all have various subtitles. And actually most recently in 2021, there was a movie 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time.
Right.
If you are interested in canon and like official timelines, this series is not for you. I'm just gonna state
that's
that.
a very good way to put
it. It's wild and it's amazing to watch. What do I? You asked basically like, what do I think the meaning is of the ending?
Well, I did, but I realized let's probably actually give a little bit of a summary of what happens, as best we can to help catch our listeners up. So, especially as I interpret it, the series itself kind of has three distinct parts. The first we've already talked about, and is now I've not seen many of the genre, but Riki, can I help me fill in how this does and doesn't fit into the genre? But is I think a fun example of a child soldier mecha anime, where it's about these child soldiers and who for various reasons have to climb into these mechas and go fight these crazy beings called angels. And there's all sorts of like Judeo-Christian iconography wrapped up in it that the creator specifically said, like, he wasn't making a commentary. He just thought it was cool, which I kind of love, honestly. Then it kind of melds into a similar story, but a much pervier version, where all of a sudden we've always had a good deal of our main character is Shinji. He's a young boy. He's like early teenager, 14, 15. He's got this older woman who's an adult he's living with, who's kind of being very provocative and flirtatious towards him. And we get into the second half, and there's like another woman character who's introduced, who's also very provocative towards him, but also hates him, but also flirts with him. We get basically softcore porn in a couple of instances where the camera doesn't show it, but we're quite literally hearing the sex that this older woman is. I mean, she's older; she's like 22. That she's having with an adult. I guess they're
Okay,
like
let's make
26.
sure that we get all of the characters
Yes.
with the names correct,
Mhm.
because that will help. So the main character, the young boy, I believe he's like 14 or 15 typically in these shows, is Shinji Ikari.
Yep.
The older woman who is his handler basically in this organization is Misato.
Right. And
The
she talks about her ex from college. So I think she's like 26, 27, something like that.
yeah, Misato Katsuragi, and
Mhm.
then the other pilot. So all the pilots are probably around the same age, somewhere
Right.
in high school. Asuka Langley Soryu, who is German Japanese
Right.
American. I don't know. So she is like the rival pilot
Right.
to Shinji. She's very competitive, and yes, because they are young people of the same age, they have interesting, conflicting feelings about each other. That is
Mm-hmm.
both antagonistic and romantic in the
Yeah.
typical way that you do, kids. Um, and then there's a third pilot in the organization, Ray. What
Right.
is her last name? Amanagi, I believe.
I think it's Ayanagi. Yeah.
And she is the quiet, mysterious. She's like the manic pixie dream girl
Right. She's
of the
very
show,
demure in opposition to the others who are kind of sexually aggressive and things like that.
and her origins are wrapped up in mystery, and she's presented as this kind of MacGuffin in the
Yeah.
story.
Very much so. So anyway, we get this kind of second version of the first half that is continuing the story about the angels, and there's still lots of mecha fighting. But again, it's just the sexuality has been dialed up quite a lot. And then we move into this third section where it becomes much more philosophical and much more really about the trauma that these kids are going through. And we kind of learn, especially with Shinji and Asaka, learning that she gets that kind of arc of all we see is her torturing and bullying our protagonist, but then we get to see her inner side and understand that she has this really horrible background. Trigger warning for unaliving. Her mother had unalived herself and done it in a really traumatic way that has left her kind of always feeling the need to be better, the need to because it's a very complicated thing. I don't want to get into the details of, but it just obviously really fucked her up. And the last couple episodes are really about the trauma that these kids are dealing with, particularly with particularly with Shinji, who winds up killing someone who wanted to be killed, but is actually the last of the angels. And then we get to learn all the background of what's going on. And again, I don't want to explain too much of it, but just kind of help you understand what we're talking about for the story. Basically, we learn that the angels have been kind of a side thing, that the real danger is this plot to bring about human instrumentality, which is the idea of the sort of melding of all humans into one greater consciousness. And here we basically get what I thought was an utterly fascinating treatise on teen angst and teen drama and teen depression. And I say those words that are often used kind of dismissively, but I think it's a beautiful portrayal of all those emotions that teenagers, and I think many adults, certainly myself, still go through, with this thesis of if all of this comes from us being separated from each other, and that we are lonely, that we are sad, that we don't understand each other, that we're constantly trying to figure out who to present to each other and how does that differ from who we really are. What if we were all just one consciousness? Wouldn't that make everything better? And the last two episodes, the all the angels have been destroyed. There's no more conflict. It's just basically inside Shinji's head, at least as I interpret it, of him experiencing what that would be like. And in the end, as the title of the last episode says, looking at that and shouting I, that he in the end reverts to his individualism and the individualism of everyone. It's not clear at all that that's actually what happens. You kind of have to interpret that in part from the title and from like the signs that happen. But that's kind of the third part, as I understand it. Does that line up to you somewhat with your understanding of how the show progresses?
Yeah, I think you said you were like halfway through, and you're like, hey, how about this as a discussion topic and something about the
Mm-hmm.
plot? And I was basically like, hold your horses.
Yeah.
Like there's I mean, you can talk about the plot of the show, but the show itself, I think, admits that the plot doesn't matter, in my opinion,
Yeah.
or just like ignores the plot at the
Mm-hmm.
end. And it becomes about Shinji and ultimately this expression of self-love.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to love yourself and to care about yourself. And at the end, I think he says that, right? Like, oh, it's okay for me to love myself. I do. Like,
Yeah.
and then all of the other characters in his head tell him omedeto, congratulations, one by one. And then
Mm-hmm.
they're all applauding him.
Right.
And that's the end of the show. And you're if you are into like the traditional plot elements and the mecha elements, you're just kind of like WTF?
Yeah.
That's the end. Excuse me?
And I
And that's why there was a fan backlash, right?
yeah.
Because for 70-80%, this show has been a traditional mecha anime, and
Mm-hmm.
you kind of came for the action, the fights with the angels. And then the final two episodes, 25 and 26, you're just like, what is this? It's so metaphysical, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful in its expression. But
Yeah.
if you're not prepared for it, I understand why you would be on the spectrum of disappointed to angry.
Yeah. I
and
think
and
that's
that
true.
does not excuse, when I say angry, that does not excuse death threats, the graffiti of the studio. Like, taking actions like that are completely inexcusable, but you can still be like, this subverted my expectations
Yeah.
in a way that I don't like that is fine to admit and to
I mean,
express an
I was a
opinion.
little I was a little angry at the ending only because I'm enjoying learning about a new genre, but it's definitely not my genre. I don't have any urge after this to go out and watch lots of more mecha anime. And frankly, I was pretty bored by a lot of the fight scenes, which does not mean they're bad. It's just like that's who I am personally. And so often I'd be watching the show while like going through my email or while like doing other kind of busy work that I could do on the computer while watching it. I couldn't do any of that during the last two episodes. So I was like, oh wait, now I'm utterly glued to the screen
Yeah,
here.
because
Um,
part of what they do, they use subtitles, and not just,
yeah,
I don't mean just like English subtitles. They have like Japanese words on the screen as dialogue that are
right,
not spoken. So
yeah,
you can't just listen because you're missing part of the dialogue that's happening in his head.
right,
Like another I don't know, like another part of him is speaking to him through
right.
this text dialogue on the screen. And
And to be,
then I also want to point out the expression of the art,
mm-hmm,
the animation itself, especially in episode 26, it grows increasingly simplified,
yeah.
right? The animation regresses as an expression of his emotional regression.
Which, and we'll talk more about the behind the scenes later stuff. A lot of what I've read said that the original reason for that was budget reasons, that they were running out of money. But I think it's a
Yeah.
beautiful way of like that may be total nonsense, but if it is, I think it's a beautiful way of taking that limitation and using it in a way that really fits the story. A couple things I just wanted to add though to what you were saying. One, those last parts do very much focus on Shinji's like discovery of self-love because he's very much been a self-loathing character. He
Yeah.
hates himself. But that's been true of a lot of the other characters too, particularly Asaka and Misoto.
Asuka,
Um, Asuka and Misoto.
Misato.
Misata? Uh,
Misato.
Misato?
Misato.
Misato,
Yeah.
and Asaka.
Asuka.
Asuka.
Yeah.
That's been true of a lot of the other characters, particularly Misato and Asaka, that they both
Asuka.
Asuka. Sorry,
Asuka.
sorry. Thank
If you
you.
need to see, if you need to like visualize.
It does help. Yeah. Misato, Asuka. Misato, Asuka. Misato, Asuka. But that self-loathing is also true for a lot of the other characters, particularly Misato and Asuka. And we kind of learn that a lot of the reasons they're acting out in various ways, some of which I think are kind of slut shamey about Misato. Like I don't actually think what she's doing is that bad, but the story is acting as though it is, and that both of them are doing it for reasons of self-loathing as well. And that while the ending is mostly about Shinji and him getting the applause, that they also both get some level of self-actualization at the end, which I just love that. And I love that it all wraps up in this way of, yeah, it doesn't say, okay, like I don't actually know if instrumentality was defeated or not, or how it was. It's just all of this is a buildup to this thought experiment of, would it be better if we were all one consciousness? And I love that, because I do wind up ending up with, yeah, I think he does the right thing by saying no, but I get exactly why it was so tempting, because of all of these emotions.
Yeah, the dialogue is so fast at the
Mhm.
end that it really like rushes through stuff. But the idea of instrumentality is, I would say, similar to like a Borg hive mind, where
Mhm.
humanity all shares a consciousness, and thus it breaks down the barriers between us as individuals, our individual egos, and makes it so that we understand each other fully,
Right.
right? Like that is what it's saying, is that once we understand each other fully and completely, like we won't hate anymore,
Yeah.
and we can love all of humanity equally.
And I think part of why that resonates for me so much is, and I imagine this is true for a lot of people, when I think about all of the conflicts and the anxiety and depression in my life, most of it comes down to, in some ways, misunderstanding.
Mhm.
The trauma of my parents fighting all the time when I was younger, and the drinking and stuff like that. I remember being this young child and hearing both of them and understanding what each of them was saying, and not understanding how the other was clearly not hearing it. And then, teenage like drama of dating or friendships or stuff like that. Most of the conflicts were either because like I couldn't understand where another person was coming from, or because I would say one thing and they would hear another. And that doesn't mean that they were wrong. It means that just that there was a gap between us of understanding. And I think about that in like personal level, but also like, yeah, like racism, war, all the kind of like conflicts of the world. So much of it's about people having false understandings of each other, and many of those are intentionally done, and all kinds of bullshit like that. But yeah, the idea that like if people could just understand that like immigrants are not here to steal jobs and replace people, that trans people are not here to be perverts and predators, that they're just people, like, yeah, that would make so much of the world's problems go away.
Yeah, it is. It's tough because when you present something like instrumentality, a hive mind, in this
Hmm.
way, it is appealing,
Yeah.
right? And this is the conflict of stories like this, is that at the end of it, because we are human, because we are individuals, I tend to think that the story has to reject that,
Yeah.
because our that like in our reality we can never achieve that,
Hmm.
with our current understanding of science and technology and whatnot. We can't achieve that, so that can't be the solution,
Yeah.
right? Because these stories have to tell us something that we can bring back into our world, the real world, and our lives, and say
Hmm.
this is how we make it better. And if the solution is this mythical instrumentality hive mind, it's like, well, shoot, I guess we're just stuck in this.
Yeah.
So that's why I love the ending so much of the original series, is that Shinji rejects instrumentality, like, but he doesn't reject it. He accepts himself,
Right.
and him, and that, to me, like, yeah, the first time I watched it, I was like, I don't get
Yeah.
it. And I had to do some supplemental reading and watch some videos and like really think about it. And this, when I rewatched it again just yesterday, I was like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, this is so beautiful and profound.
Yeah. I,
Um,
I think that's a good way to put it. And I had to do the same. I had to read some. I had to talk to you some. It's, I think, one of those times where, like, Judith Butler is one of my favorite theoreticians, and I think has had some phenomenal ideas about gender and sexuality and just the understanding of self, and the idea that kind of how we present ourselves as that is all drag in some way or another. And I remember the professor who introduced me to her saying, like, look, this is one of the wisest, one of the smartest thinkers, one of the best theoreticians, and one of the worst writers you'll ever come across. Because like, she has sentences that stretch on for pages.
mm,
It's very dense and very hard to read. And I think this is a much better, but I think this is kind of a similar thing where, they're in those ending 2 episodes, we spend, and even actually with the two before it, we spend a lot of time with the characters just repeating over and over what it is they hate about themselves in these agonizing, horrific ways that I just like. The idea of watching it again strikes me as really painful. Like, I don't want to do it because it was so hard to experience.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think the profundity of it really hits hard. Let me ask a question also, because there was something I was thinking about, and I'm about to ask you one of those, like, let's make incredibly broad generalizations about culture based on like anecdotal experience. So feel free to tell me this is all ridiculous. But this idea of the conflict between the individual and like the larger culture is one that I'm very used to. But where most of the time in the stories that I read, like as an American living in America, I've always felt that the biggest problem with our culture is that we are too focused on the individual, that we are too focused on self love and honoring yourself and doing what you think is right and not communal responsibility enough. One of the people who's had the most impact on my life was a person who was kind of my mentor when I was in grad school. He was from Japan. He lives in the United States now, still as a pastor, and phenomenal one as far as I understand. His name is Shinya, and so I was thinking of him a lot in terms of these characters, because he and I had this discussion at one point about a completely different story, and what he was saying to me was that where as he had grown up, the focus is much more on community, and so a story that emphasizes the individual is more radical. And I'm broadly summing up a conversation I had 24 years ago, but the idea was basically looking at how like the difference in American culture that's kind of swung too far to individualism, and as he put it, in his understanding specifically, Japanese culture having swung too far to the other side, and that that both stories have value, but in that understanding those individual cultures in individual contexts. And I found myself, because there is a part of me that's like, why am I watching a story about um, the individualism of the self that way? And that understanding helped me to put this in context somewhat. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, or like everything I'm saying is just ridiculous, or like uh, whatever you want to say.
Well, in general, I would agree with a thesis that Japan is a less individual centric
Hmm.
culture, and it puts a lot of pressure on people to conform and to sacrifice
Yeah.
themselves in ways like I would think of like the concept of overtime, right?
Mm,
In US culture, overtime is very much like, well, if you're gonna make me do this, you better pay me. Otherwise, I'm not gonna do it.
right.
In Japan, overtime is, I would say, expected in a lot of business culture,
Hmm.
that you have to finish your work no matter what, and it doesn't matter what the cost to you personally or physically or emotionally is,
Right.
because the work is more important. The
And you're
company
not
is
getting
more
paid
important.
time and a half or anything like that.
I don't know the specifics,
Right.
yeah, but it is like ultimately it doesn't matter what you're paid, like you have to finish kind of
Right.
thing, yeah. Um, probably it's probably like in salaried culture
Hmm.
more, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Literally, like in Japan, if you go to work in an office, you're called a salaryman, salaryman.
Mm,
So So yeah, imagine like if you're salary and they're just like, well, just finish the work. And it's like, but it's midnight. Like my family's waiting, right?
All
Finish the
right.
work. It's
Yeah.
kind of the attitude that is expressed a lot.
Hmm. And I can see that a lot in this story. I mean, and I wonder to what extent this is kind of a commentary on that, because in our earlier episode about this show, we talked a lot about this idea of child soldiers and that it's often presented as this great honor. Like, how cool the idea is, like 12-year-olds are going to watch this and be like, how cool is it that someone my age or a little bit older could like be the one to jump into a mecha? And so much of this is about Shinji like exploring that he doesn't want to do this, that he's doing it because he hates himself, because he thinks maybe this will, he resolve his horrific relationship with his father, that it will give him some kind of a purpose.
Yeah, because
Because
his father Gendo is the one who runs the organization and is at first like made him become a pilot, like forced
right,
him to become a pilot,
right,
and he continues to do the job even though he hates it and he hates himself for doing it because he wants the love and approval of his father.
right.
Ultimately, it's very sad.
And I think that's one of the other I think that's one of the other really profound things about it, and something that I had to kind of challenge myself on, is that there is that because in a lot of, it's never about selfishness. It's never about asking Shinji to put his needs above others. It's about the fact that he hates himself so much means that he's actually hurting himself and hurting others, because he is isolating himself so much, because he is unable to really ever make decisions of what he wants, which is hurtful to the people who care about him. Um, and that kind of messaging can be taken in a bad way of like, it's still your fault that other people are sad around you and you really should just be focused on yourself. And I'm not saying it goes that direction, but I think it does a really beautiful job of saying this isn't about selfishness. This is about loving yourself and accepting that others can see those good things in you and allowing you to see the good things in other people.
Yeah, I so from I don't know how it was for you, but for me, the 18th episode was like a turning point for my emotional
Mm-hmm.
connection with this anime. This was it's called the translation is Life and Death Decisions. It's the one where he fights against Unit 3,
Mm-hmm.
which is being piloted by his friend at school.
Right.
It's discovered that he's the pilot for Unit 3, but Shinji doesn't know this.
Right.
Toji is his name, his friend Toji. And Shinji at one point chooses not to fight anymore. He
Right.
makes a decision like, I'm not going to do this. And then Gendo forces, there's like a technological thing that they're using. I think it's called a dummy plug in the English
Mm-hmm.
translation. And they force basically like a computer to take over
And
his Unit 1.
And to be clear, part of the issue is that Unit 3 has been somewhat taken over by an angel. And so it's a threat
Yes.
and it has to be stopped, but he doesn't
But
want to fight a fellow Eva.
he knows that there's a human pilot. Even
Right.
he doesn't know that it's Toji, but he knows that there's a human pilot. And he's like, I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to kill a human,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. And Gendo forces the dummy plug to take over, which goes berserk. And I don't think he kills Toji, but he injures him severely. And when the battle is over and they pull the pilot out and he sees that it's his friend, like that's the point where he breaks
Yeah.
emotionally. And from that point on is like the very much like his emotional arc towards the ending of the show
Right.
begins here. And I like you watched it all the way through. I had to stop for like several days after watching this episode because I
Mm-hmm.
just was not ready for that level of emotional, I would say like destitution, almost like just
Mm-hmm.
it broke me watching it.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it didn't hit me. What hit me much harder was where there's another towards the end of it. They realized that the final angel, the last of these angels, is appearing to everyone as a human boy, a little older than Shinji, and the two of them become close friends.
Yeah.
Um,
Kaoru.
Kaoru, yeah. I would even say there's probably a lot of fan fiction written about the two of them because Kaoru is very affectionate towards Shinji,
Oh yeah,
Uh,
they're I don't know if they're physical lovers, but they love each other.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And because he's an angel, Shinji has to kill him.
Yeah.
And and this guy accepts that because he's about to cause the I think cause the third impact, which will destroy humanity. And so he wants Shinji to kill him, particularly because he doesn't want to kill kill Shinji. And that's the one that broke me. Just that, and I think um honestly I really identified with Asuka in a lot of ways. And I think so her trauma and all the stuff about the death of her mother, those are the things that really hit me the hardest. And I had to kind of pause for a couple hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things that is because you're seeing numerous characters all go through this loneliness and this separation from each other, but they're all having it for different reasons and they're all reacting to it in different ways. It really helps to like I think there's something in it for everyone. It's like no matter who you are, this is going to hit your trauma and really upset you, which is maybe not a selling point, but if you're an emotional masochist like myself, like you'll find something in this to really hit you hard and make you like. For me, there was some catharsis in it.
Yeah, I think for me the Toji fight, episode 18, was more personally, I don't want to say appealing, but
Yeah.
it struck my nerves more. But also like because I took that time off from watching the show, and when
Mm-hmm.
I came back, like I was in this mindset of like I understand what's going on now with this
Oh
show.
no.
So I had to like, the rest of these things did hit me,
Yeah.
but I was like prepared. Like I
Yeah.
just wasn't prepared for that to happen in that way. And I think that's why I had to take some time off.
That's fair.
Is that I myself was treating it like a normal anime,
Yeah.
and that episode was like, nah, that's not what's going on here.
I will say also, there's one other thing I don't want to make this a full discussion, and we could be a whole other episode, I'm sure. There was one thing though I think that was also taking me out of it a little bit and making it a little harder for me to deal with the profundity of it, and I sometimes had to kind of stop and kind of rethink about and then come back to watch. I kind of made a joke about how it becomes kind of softcore porn in the second act, and a lot of times I don't mind that. It felt, I think it made me very uncomfortable, in part because it just felt so out of tone with the rest of what we'd been seeing, but also because one of the sexual relationships that is really proposed as a legitimate possibility, and a little bit acted on, and a little more acted on actually in the movie, which we'll get to talking about in a second, is between Misato and Shinji, uh, who, remember, is a teenage boy and his much older adult, like literally guardian, parental figure almost. Um, like they kiss at one point in the series. There's a point at which he's obviously very upset, and she kind of offers her body to him as a like, this is what I know about how to give comfort to someone, which I found very profound about her. But the idea that, like, I don't know, for me, the idea that she uses sexuality as a way of dealing with her issues and helping other people to deal with her issues makes total sense. The idea that would be so extreme that she would hit on a 15-year-old kid who's basically like her foster child at that point seemed really ridiculous to me, and kind of so over the line that it sort of took me out of it for a second. Am I missing something there? Did it have that kind of effect on you? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, okay. So how do we approach this? First, I would say, well, you call it softcore porn. Like there is quite a bit of animated nudity.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think all women, maybe mostly women. I don't know. There's a lot of animated nudity
Mm-hmm.
in this show. If that's not your thing, yeah, don't watch this. But in general, I would say like anime, or just like Japanese culture, like even just like live action shows
Mm-hmm.
in Japan are more comfortable with nudity.
Yeah.
Um, the United States is very puritanical in terms of like what is allowed to be shown
Yeah.
on television and movies. So that's just a thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a very normal thing to see frontal female
Right.
nudity, I would
It,
say.
And I would just say, to be clear, that's not even what I'm talking about, especially because I think they do it in a very tasteful way in some way, sometimes very much not. But like a lot of the nudity is like when you're looking at clones of Rey's body for plot reasons and stuff like that. So it's not in a sexualized situation. And yeah, I think American Puritanicalness on nudity is kind of ridiculous. I'm mostly talking about the like where the camera is looking at like the side of the bed and we're hearing Misato's moans during sex for a good like 30 to 40 seconds. That's when I was like, wait, really? That's what we're doing here?
Yeah, okay. And that is with her ex-boyfriend who then they like respark a relationship, Kaji, I believe.
Right.
So that is a legitimate adult relationship. Like we have to make that clear because you're
Yes.
talking about her and Shinji. My opinion of what's going on with Misato and Shinji, a she has some emotional issues, which like the show does address and deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because she dealt with a major trauma when she was, maybe Shinji's age, even younger,
Yeah.
perhaps. She was at the site of the second impact, which is presented as like basically a scientific experiment gone wrong, disaster. A bunch of
Yeah.
people died, including her father. And so there is this thread that she is emotionally stuck
Yeah. She
in that
couldn't speak
moment.
for like years after that moment.
Um, so she's dealing with the PTSD of her father dying, of all these people she knew dying.
Right.
And so there's an emotional stuckness to her character. And I'm not saying that excuses like
Mm-hmm.
doing this with Shinji, but I think it's trying to present like she is physically older, but she's emotionally stuck at this point in
That
some
makes sense.
ways. The other thing is that I think she's being manipulative intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
As his handler, her job is to get him to fight
Right.
in the Ava against the Angels, and she is presented as being willing to do anything to keep him fighting.
Right.
Even though at some points she doesn't want to, right? That she wishes that Shinji could just be a normal kid and have a normal life, but she is very devoted to her job
Right.
and devoted, and maybe that's like the Japaneseness of it we were talking about. Like she does things that I believe she finds reprehensible in order
Mm.
to get Shinji motivated enough to fight, and part of that is using her sexuality to motivate him.
That's fair. And I will say that there's a marked difference. Like when she's at home, when she's off duty, she drinks, she leaves her clothing all around. She's very kind of playful and flirtatious. When she's in uniform, when she's in the command center, there's none of that. So
Yeah.
the idea for having that definitely makes sense. I think.
Yeah, I would not present I would not say that she has any legitimate sexual interest or desires for Shinji. That
Okay.
is all part of this manipulation.
Okay. I think I can get that. I can get behind that a lot better. I think for me, I really appreciated seeing like this idea of exploring her reasons for her sexuality, and that sometimes they're not the best, but sometimes they are. And so the idea that then that they were going to take that to such an extreme bothered me, but
Yeah.
I like that interpretation a lot more.
And I think the movie end makes that more clear. Like, do we want to talk about that?
Yeah, let's start talking about the movie in general.
Because there, like, to segue into that, there's a scene in End of Evangelion where, like Shinji again is like completely emotionally devastated. There's a
Mhm.
meme of Shinji like sitting with his knees in his arms, just the depression pose,
Yeah.
and he spends like most of the first half of the movie in that
Mhm.
pose, completely like broken. And she is trying to get him into the Ava Unit 1 to fight against the enemy. And at one point, she kisses him. She gives him like a very passionate kiss,
Mhm.
and then says something like, "When you get back from the fight, like I'll show you more," or something like
Yeah.
that. Like, and to me, she's been injured at that point. I think she knows she's dead, like she's
Yeah.
going to die from her injuries. And again, like this is her emotionally manipulating Shinji to motivate him because
Mhm.
he's broken, and she's trying to do anything she can to break him out of this
Right.
depression, and using her sexuality to be like, when you come back, there's more for you, because he's a 14, 15-year-old boy. It's
Right.
like, this is gonna motivate him.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. I because that scene also, I was like, "What the hell is happening
Yeah.
here?"
It's like, what?
Um,
Is she really like into him? Like, no,
yeah,
I 100% do not believe that in that moment. I think she knows she's dead. And like, he's gonna
yeah.
come back from the fight if he does, and she's not gonna be there.
I think you're right about the manipulation and that she's not, like, actively attracted to him. I do think that and the show, I think, really dives more into this, that there is some element of that she has learned this is the power she has, like, that this is the way to motivate people.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so I think that kind of level of dysfunction it's not a cold calculating as much, it's also like this is what she knows and what she's learned. Um, but let's pull the camera back a bit and talk more about that overall movie because you say fighting the enemy, and what we mean is he's fighting other humans and other human controlled entities at that point. The angels are all dead. Um, sort of. How, how would you give like an overview of that movie?
Oh, I love it. I mean,
Hmm.
I love both of the endings. They're completely different.
Yeah.
I understand the real life historical reasons that this movie was made, and you
Hmm.
can definitely see the fingerprints of that. Of like, there's a big old mecha fight,
Yep.
air horn, brr, brr, mecha fight in this movie to satisfy like that part of fandom.
Hmm.
But the movie also explains instrumentality in a
Hmm.
more understandable way, and it shows the visuals of like outside of Shinji's head of what's
Hmm.
happening to everyone else,
Right.
that makes it, for me, better.
Yeah.
Like, I like that part a lot more, because it helps answer some of these questions that we all had.
Yeah, it goes into a lot more depth. It sort of fills in the gaps of what I think a lot of people have been missing, myself very much included, about how there are these two different shadowy organizations. Nerve is one of them, and that's the one that Shinji's father is the head of. Uh, and then the other one, which they kept writing it on the screen in English as Sheen, but I think it's actually more like Zhen. What?
No, they write it as SEAL, SEELE
That's right. Yeah,
is the
Seal.
organization, but I believe it's supposed. I believe it's German, and I
Hmm.
think it might be like Ziel.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. Um, and so a lot of this is the fight between those two groups, and it's battle and it's horrific, and this is also where a lot more of the Judeo-Christian mythology comes into it. There's all this thing about the spear of Longinus, which is, by the way, is the spear that pierced Christ.
Mhm.
um
Which was in the series.
which was in the series definitely, but was never explained in the same way. And here also in the movie we get a lot more about the Lilith and the Adam of it all,
Yes.
which is I might do another episode where I bring on a Jewish scholar and would still love to have you on, and we just talk about what are all the mythological references.
Yeah.
The
And
in but putting that aside for a second, um, the ending I think is beautiful as well. You're right, but it's much darker. It's as I understand it, like instrumentality happens, but it sucks. It's terrible. But that's just where we end with. Shinji is just in this place of even in this place, he now has all this understanding, but he still hates himself, and nothing deals with that. And there's like a little sliver of optimism at the end, but it's a much bleaker future.
yeah, it is equally confusing, I would
Yeah,
say. The series ending is like completely ambiguous as to the fate of humanity, right?
yeah,
Because it's all in Shinji's head. All the other characters are in his head. So when he's applauded at the end, it just ends there, and he doesn't, quote unquote, wake up. So we don't
yeah,
know what happened to everyone else in the real world. Um, in this one, everyone else disintegrates into orange goo
yeah.
and becomes one pool of orange goo.
Hmm.
I guess, like, when I said Borg hive mind, it's probably more like the changelings in Deep Space Nine, if you're familiar.
Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
have just like an ocean of goo that is
Yeah.
all of them,
The Great
and
Link.
individuals can like come out of the link and be
Yeah.
individual piles of goo. So it's a little different. But I think within the link, that is what instrumentality is like everyone shares a consciousness.
Yeah. And it was very odd to see, but I did love it. I thought it was another beautiful version of the story.
Oh, it's
But
gorgeous.
I didn't really understand it until again I read some of the behind the scenes stuff, and the director has said this, like, that a lot of ways this was his response to all of the hate that they got. And like there are images of like the graffiti on the building of the studio is like an image in the show, and there are letters on like that you see some of like the death threat, horrible hate mail that they got like is in this movie quite literally.
Yeah.
And reading the interviews with him, the best I think analogy I can use to help people understand it is imagine if Ryan Johnson said, "All right, you wanted to see Luke?" And he gives them another ending to The Last Jedi in which Luke does go out and face down the whole First Order with a laser sword. And he has this incredible duel with against Kylo, and he defeats Kylo because Luke is awesome and he defeats lots and lots of people. But in the end, the First Order kills him and kills all the resistance, and the First Order wins. Like that's what this movie felt like to me. Is it was kind of the director saying, like, okay, you said you wanted this. This is where that winds up. And I love that artistically for what it is. And I also love it for like a director's just FUing to the like to that part of the fan base.
Yeah, but the stuff you mentioned, this instead of using the regressive animation to
Mm-hmm.
show stuff, this movie uses real life footage, as you said,
Right.
and it's equally fascinating to me because
Yeah.
it brings it back to us. Like
Yeah.
it puts us into the movie.
Yeah.
Into this animated movie, there's real life footage of people, part of it like in a theater, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah, like he's like, you the audience of this movie are now part of it.
Right.
You are part of instrumentality.
Well,
And
because part.
I can't even imagine like being in a theater watching this and like seeing that. Like I
Oh
think
my god. Yeah.
my mind would break.
Well, because I think part of what he's getting, I think it is a broader message for everyone about how we're all involved in this.
Yeah.
But to me, I thought there was also a very specific message of, hey, you people who look at me and the other creators of this and just have all this hate because all you see us as is the people you think who betrayed us, like you're the people this is about. You're the people who need who might need instrumentality because you are that separated. You're unable to recognize the humanity of me and my staff and all those folks. Um, and like, given that that's a comment we're talking about in fandom today all the time, like to me, that was just also incredibly profound.
Yeah. It's I honestly can't say which ending I like better
Mm-hmm.
because they're just so different.
Yeah.
And all I can say is like they both do things that are profound and beautiful, and ultimately I appreciate that they both exist.
Yeah.
And it also makes me appreciate, so there's a Star Trek creator that I follow, and he likes to say like he doesn't care about the details. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's here to like enjoy the story and the characters, and he doesn't care like that in the year 24 like XX like this was supposed to happen, but this other show doesn't acknowledge it, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
Like the canonicity of these franchises often
Mm-hmm.
becomes exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that this franchise just basically says F your canon or our
Yeah.
canon, I guess. The all of these stories exist. It doesn't matter, like
Yeah.
whether they're the same or different or whatever. And on that level, like to go back to the series, we forgot to talk about this. There's a section in episode 26 where in his head Shinji sees a slice of life version of his life. You remember this
Mm-hmm.
part
Yep.
where he is just a regular high school kid going to school with his best friend Asuka, and on his way they run into Ray, the new kid, and
Mhm.
there's all this like regular high school anime flirtation and stuff like that. And I love that scene. I was like, wow, I would just watch like an entire series of this, like
Yeah.
these characters in a normal setting.
I think one of the most beautiful things about it is in that he has both of his parents and they're both loving parents. Because one of the ideas that's put forward, and again, not to go into all the complexity of this, but like for reasons, TM, um, Risotto, is that how you pronounce the name of the father?
His father is Gendo.
Get I don't know where I got R. I'm thinking of Italian food. Um, in the show and in the movie, even more so, one of the things we learn is that Gendo, his father, part of the reason why he's so cold and so horrible, not to justify it, but is that his wife, Shinji's mother, Yui, died a long time ago, specifically as part of this whole plan of instrumentality, and that he's kind of following her plan in part because his main goal is to see her. And so I think part of the conceit of this alternate future is not only that he has his friends, but that because his parents are still alive, they're both like his father's still a decent person. Which again, I just
Yeah,
I,
I wouldn't go that far.
okay.
Like when you said they're loving, I kind of winced at that because Gendo in the slice of life version
Hmm.
spends the entire time faceless behind a newspaper, and his
That's true.
wife keeps saying like, "Stop reading that newspaper, like we have to get ready for like our meeting with the professor." And he's just like,
Hmm.
"Uh-huh.
That's
Uh-huh."
fair. That's
Like
fair.
that's like so it's a commentary still on the character Gendo.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he's alive and they're a normal family, and it's like he's not as far as we know, not abusive to him, right?
Right.
Because
He's
he's
not
not
actually berating
he's
Shinji, but you're
not
right. He's
making
also not father of the
Pilot a
year.
kill machine,
Yeah.
but it still does present him as this distant father
Right.
in that way.
Which I do appreciate because like lots of fathers and lots of people lose their spouses and are still wonderful parents. So, again, it's that like not everyone goes down that road. What else about the movie do we want to touch on?
I mean, I know it's not your favorite, but like I do want to again like comment on the fight.
Yeah,
It
go for it, please.
like Asuka has this fight against I believe 9 um Ava units. They're kind of like the
Hmm.
next generation of Ava that are all controlled by the dummy plug we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So they're basically like AI. There's no human pilot. And
If you
she
imagine from Iron Man 2, when
yeah,
Iron Man and War Machine are fighting all the pilotless,
the drones, yeah.
yeah, it's exactly that.
And she absolutely wails on them. So yeah, if this is fan service, like give me more of it. Like it
Yeah.
is one of the best animated fight sequences like I've seen.
I also really loved it. And I love that you love the fight scenes. I don't begrudge anyone that. It's just not my thing personally. But part of what I love is that and this is very much where I got that idea of like Luke gets to be super awesome but still loses because he was right. He couldn't face them all down with just a laser sword. Because in the end she dies because she
Yeah.
does this incredible takedown of all of them, and she has 2.5 minutes to do it, and she does it with like 4 seconds left, and she is just like beaten within an inch of her life, but she's still there, and she's like, guys, I did it. I fought. Because all the show, all she's wanted was the chance to prove herself, to show that she really is the
She's the
best,
best. Yeah.
and she gets it, and it's meaningless because all the Evas reconstruct themselves and then just utterly destroy her in this horribly horrific way. And you
They eat
hear
her
her,
alive. Well, they
yeah,
eat her Ava alive, which the pilots are psychically connected, so she
yeah,
feels that.
yeah, she is quite literally dead at the end. And to me, it's this beautiful moment.
Is she? Like I'm just gonna
Okay,
because like this show is so confusing and ambiguous.
that's what I took from it. And a couple things I've read have said that, but you're right, it could be ambiguous. But either way,
I will accept that she dies like at
yeah,
the end of the fight, but the end of the movie is Shinji and Asuka on a beach and she appears to be alive.
I
I
thought that
don't
was in
I
his
don't
head. But again,
I don't know.
the point being though, she
Yeah,
has a very bad day.
fair.
She
Yeah.
has a no good, very bad day. And to me, that like there's a very monkey's paw feeling to me about the movie, and that like people get what they want, but it's horrible. She gets exactly what she wants, and it means nothing, and she's utterly destroyed by it. And
Yeah.
I just, to me, that was also such a beautiful moment of like the danger of focusing, because part of why she's so terrible to everyone is she's so focused on this because of her trauma and because her thinking this is the only way to get mommy to love her again and to not leave. And that's a gross oversimplification of a very complex, nuanced character, but that's the basis of it. And so I was kind of annoyed when she won that fight, and I was like, really? That's oh, okay. And when I saw the Evas all get back, I was like, oh, I see exactly what you're doing here. You are doing the fan service, but then also showing why the fan service is meaningless. And I just
Yeah, I wouldn't say meaningless. I would say an important part of the commentary for a lot of anime like this, and Gundam is similar,
mm-hmm.
is that ultimately they need to be anti-war
Yep.
and anti-fighting,
Mm,
and to show that you can win the fight, but what will it cost you, right? Like in this case, it costs her life. In a lot of
yeah.
cases, it costs like a pilot in Gundam their sanity,
Mm-hmm.
literally. Um, so I think that that is a very important part of mecha anime commentary on things, is that I don't want them, and for the most part they don't. I don't want them to glorify the violence.
Right.
Like it can be very aesthetically pleasing. Like the fights are awesome to watch, but at the end of it, you shouldn't be left with a feeling like, yeah, like let's fight. It should
Yeah.
be like, wow, like that's devastating. Like this is
Yeah.
devastating.
I think one of the most profound quotes I've ever heard from a director is the director of the Hunger Games movie, who was saying like that they realized they had that same problem of these are books that are fundamentally about the that the horrors of glorifying like fighting, but especially of like
Yeah,
kids fighting.
kids killing other kids, right?
And he was like, so how do I make a movie that doesn't do that? And he said the sort of guiding ethos he had, and that he passed on to all the staff, and that he talked with Suzanne Collins, and she was very much on board with, was he didn't want people coming out of the movie and like kids reenacting the cool fight moves.
Hmm.
And I thought
Yeah,
that was such a brilliant way to think about it. And I think you're right. That's kind of what this does, is it really is like, hey kid, you think it'd be really fun? No.
yeah. You shouldn't want to be these characters.
Yeah.
I think like if because there are video games and stuff, so it's fine to be like, I want to control this mecha and be in this fight, but you should not want to be any of these characters, like in any real sense.
Yeah. I think that's also why it's so significant that the last battles, with the exception of what we said in the movie, the last battles that Shinji fights are almost entirely in his head. Like even before the instrumentality, all these angels he's had to defeat through these combination of physical and technological marvels. The last angel is really easy for him to kill in terms of like physically making it happen.
Yeah, you mean
But
Kaoru?
yeah, Kaoru, but to do it, he has to overcome all of his emotional connection to this character in a way that's like, and I just love like that. That's the hard part, not killing him, because he can do it. And he does it in a horrifically gruesome way that is not shown, but shown. I don't want to give it away if anyone's going to watch it, but is just that moment also like hit me so hard. Just the sign of
Hmm.
the hand. Um, but yeah, and then the last fight is again entirely inside his mind. There's nothing to do with the technology, and
Yeah.
I love that.
Going back to the movie, I
Yep.
I want to talk about the actual instrumentality scene.
Mm-hmm.
It is I again, like I rewatched this yesterday, and it is just beautiful. Like the destruction of humanity is beautiful. Like that's my conclusion. There's a song that plays. The song is called "Komm süßer Tod,"
Mm-hmm.
which is German for "Come Sweet Death," and it is the most pleasant, like
Yeah.
sweet pop song. And I did some research. I haven't found like a definitive truth, but fandom suggests that Hideaki Anno, the director, the creator, wanted to use the song "Hey Jude" by the Beatles
I
in
would
this
love that.
sequence.
Uh-huh.
And you can hear it in the song, and there's actually like a YouTube video that like basically plays the two songs together, and it like
Mhm.
matches up very well. So it's like, yeah, I can see this, I can hear this. But I guess Beatles songs are hard to get or
Yeah.
expensive to get. Um, but the song playing over like humans dissolving into orange goo, and when they do, like they see like the person that they love the most kind of
Mhm.
in their head, comforting them as they
Yeah.
gooify. And this like very pleasant song is playing. It's like 6 or 7 minute sequence. Absolutely gorgeous. Like,
Yeah.
wow, what a scene.
The use of music throughout both of these endings is really powerful. In the series, and I think a little bit in the movie, but especially in the series, they use the Hallelujah chorus and some other like
Mm,
very traditional Christian choral pieces that are just such an interesting counterpoint to all this discussion of fighting angels and Adam and Lilith. And it to me, there's something very beautiful and very telling of the director has very specifically said, like, he is not making theological commentary. He just thinks these names were cool and this imagery is cool. But like, if you go onto one of like the research paper websites, like someone wrote their like senior thesis or like graduate thesis specifically on the theology of this show.
mhm.
Like, and there's tons of that stuff of people wanting to read in how they think this is a commentary on the theology of all this stuff. And I'm fascinated to read more about that because I do love all these theological references. But knowing that the creator had no intention of any of that and no knowledge really of any of it, he just was having fun with it. You know, humanity has discovered some deep secret from way in its past. What should we use? How about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Go for it. There are some ancient progenitor ideas. How about Adam and Lilith? Let's go for it.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this last time we talked about Evangelion. It is it is cultural appropriation in a
Mhm.
sense. To take something from another culture that you don't know anything about, he is admitted, and to just like use some of its trappings in the story. So
Mhm.
I'm not going to begrudge anyone from like a Judeo-Christian faith that is offended or says like why would someone do this, right? Like that's fair. Like I think it's very fair to criticize
Mhm.
this for using these names and items in this way. um yeah, and then like that's something that we should accept and discuss.
And I think for me, I think mentioned this before, but I'll kind of reiterate, maybe go into a little more detail. As a Christian, the parts of it that are Christian don't bother me in the slightest. Because I kind of think like, yes, it's cultural appreciation, but it's also the punching up versus punching down. Like I think Christianity could use some, being parodied and made fun of and being appropriated. Um,
In a global sense, yeah, I
in a
will
global
say
sense,
like
yeah.
in a Japanese sense it's probably punching down a bit.
Okay, that's really helpful to think about. I would say I am, and there's one person I've reached out to who may come on the show at another time if he does watch the show. He's a queer man who does a lot of stuff specifically on Kabbalah, which is Kabbalah is kind of Jewish mysticism, and it's not. It draws from a lot of Jewish sacred texts that aren't just the Torah and the Tanakh, but like some of the other passages, and that's where a lot of the. I realize. Let me give like a 15 seconds to the Adam Lilith thing. In the Bible, there's only Adam and Eve, but there's an understanding in the Talmud, which is a lot of other kind of like extra biblical writings in Judaism, and in some other writings, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, that Lilith is actually the first woman that God created. That, and this is part of why you get two different stories in the book of Genesis. I'm probably boring everyone who's not a biblical historian now, but I'll make this very quick. The idea being that the first woman who is created for Adam is created as Adam's equal, and she rejects Adam and rejects God's plan for her and goes off into the woods and becomes the mother of werewolves and vampires and and
Yeah.
demons and a lot of that's added much later. And there's now it's there's a very misogynistic reading of it, and there's now also a very feminist reading of it, and that's why Liv is all claimed in this very feminist way. So that just explain those terms. But the point of all it being that I hear what you're saying in the Japanese context. For myself as a Christian, I'm not bothered. but I would definitely understand why there's some parts of it that are very specific to Judaism that I could definitely understand some of those folks feeling, I think, a legitimate claim of cultural appropriation.
Yeah. I would love to definitely like talk to someone, hear more
Mm-hmm.
in depth about this.
Yeah.
Just because it's interesting to me. It's
Yeah.
interesting to me in a way that like other instances of cultural appropriation, like
Yeah.
because it's this is not an act of appreciation, right?
Right.
Like that's the issue. Like I don't know if we can go so far as to say appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's kind of an opinion, but it is not appreciation. Like it
Yeah.
is not like a deep understanding of the subject and like trying to bring something new to a discussion
Right.
of these items and names. So I don't know. Like it's that is probably something for a different day.
Yeah.
But
So. The one other thing I just want to add is kind of an interesting note about this. The word Evangelion is it's taken from a Greek word that is the basis also of the word evangelical,
mhm.
which literally means just to spread good news, with the gospel being the good news as Christians
Yeah.
understand it. But an evangelium was a statement of good news. And while that is the term that was then used by the gospel writers and the other Christian writers, it was also just a term, actually maybe a Roman term. Classicists are now mad at me, but it was a term that was used at the time, so that like a city might get a letter from Emperor Tiberius saying that like something good was going to happen to that city, and it would be called the Evangelium of Emperor Tiberius. So just to give
Mm.
like some background on what that word is.
That's interesting. That could be more deliberate, perhaps,
Yeah,
right? Because the way the angels are presented in this story, like
yeah,
they are coming to humanity to do something, question mark.
right. I mean, again, here I don't want to read too much into what the author intended, but a quite literal reading of one of the Gospels is that in Christ all humans will be one. So like you could definitely, like, I think it's more like we'll all kind of be one community, one body, but like we talk about the one body of Christ in which we're all united. So like human instrumentality could very much be. I get why that kind of Christian could see human instrumentality and be like, oh, this guy's a secret Christian. He meant it all to be, evangelical and stuff like that,
Hmm.
which is kind of like reverse. It's kind of like going. It's recultural appropriation. I don't know. It's at that point we get very confused on the terms, but it's something. Let's talk a little bit more about the production of this. I think we've talked about kind of the budget stuff. We've talked about kind of that so much of this movie was a response to the hate by the fans. What else about kind of the behind the scenes stuff did you want to comment on?
Yeah, well, Hideaki Anno has been very open about the fact. I mean, now I don't know at the time, but he's been open about the fact that he was depressed at
Yeah.
the time of creating this originally, partly to do with the process of creating it, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the budget slash time crunch of the project originally, because it was a TV series, so it's like you have to get every episode done and out in a
Yeah.
timely fashion. And so there are people who I guess accuse him of like rushing the ending or like
Mm-hmm.
not finishing the ending, and that was part of the backlash. Well, we can never really know for sure
Yeah.
what was intended and what was a result of all this. But the fact that he's been so clear about like he was depressed, and that comes through in like literally like the Shinji meme, like of him being depressed, like
Right.
the embodiment of that. But also it makes me appreciate the series ending even more, the
Mm-hmm.
self-love and the congratulations from everyone.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine what it must have been like for him as the creator to pen that,
Yeah.
right? If Shinji is an expression of his own depression, to have him say, "I love myself." and have everyone congratulate him. It's so beautiful.
I cried when I read about that part of the story, and because yeah, really, I mean, he's an artist, and he should get to use his art as his self-expression and as his catharsis. And in
Yeah.
some ways, like there's a meta of that. Like, actually, I hadn't even thought of it in these terms, but like the decision to stop making art for everyone else as what they want, and instead make the art you want. That's exactly Shinji's story. That's the story of accepting self-love and
Yeah.
of not living to please others. And part of what I read was that actually, as you said, a lot of it was the creative process itself that brought about the depression, brought about, or at least made it much worse, the depression and the anxiety. And I think today we think of like, you know, these eight episode, 10 episode series where the impression is that like every word of the last episode has been written before you start shooting the first episode. And that's not always true today, but it certainly wasn't true in the 90s when people were writing these things.
Mhm.
And there's a 26 episode arc. And honestly, I kind of love the idea that he's creating this show and people are liking it, but he's hating himself and he's not liking it. And so halfway through, he's like, you know what? By the end, we're just going to deal with emotions. That's what I'm feeling right now. I don't want to write about mechas anymore. I want to write about this. And that's what he does. And again, I get why fans would be like, wait, that's not what it was supposed to be. But like, that's an artist living his life and living his expression. And the idea that the emotional tenor of the writer changes during the show and that affects the show, I just think it's really beautiful. And I think it's completely legitimate.
And I also that's why this show resonates still 30 years later, coming up on the 30th anniversary,
Mhm.
compared to other anime, mecha anime from that era. Like I remember like Bubblegum Crisis was a thing.
Mhm.
Um Even something like Aeon Flux
Mhm.
got a movie, right? Like a live action
Yep.
Western movie and all that, but it's faded. Like Aeon Flux is faded. Neon Genesis like still resonates to the point where I don't know if had to, but you know, because money is good. But they had to make a new version.
Yeah.
Um, and I think part of that is because even now, like if you watch it now, we can see his fingerprints. We can see his depression.
Yeah.
And that as an audience member that s- makes something happen in your own heart and
Yeah.
mind. And you're as you're watching you're like what am I feeling? Right? Like that's what
Yeah.
I went through. And then like I said, when episode 18 hit, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I can't do this right now. I can't
Mhm.
do this right now. And I love that. Like it was devastating for me watching, but it's art.
Yeah.
It
It
made
really
me
is.
feel something so profound. It's art. Like it went so far beyond just like television, you know, ho hum television, in my opinion.
And I think it's a reason why, like, I enjoy fan service too from time to time, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. But like to me, it is I know nothing about the conversation that happened around this movie, but I can't help but think of it in terms of the backlash Ryan Johnson got in Last Jedi, and then the backlash like that the Acolyte got, and things like that. And to me, those are works of art, and they're not work. They're specifically saying we're not going to give the fans what they want, and some people can really appreciate that and really love it. And I don't think there's anything wrong if you didn't like it. Um, but it to me, kind of an uber message of all of this is there's something really, and that's why I love the movie so much. There's something really dangerous when you ask artists to put aside, to like shovel down their own artistic inspiration and just give the fans what they want. And that would really create a kind of like, I love Marvel, but with the exception of the newest show that just came out, which I love, Agatha. I want to keep saying Agatha explains it all, but no, Agatha. After
All
all,
along.
Agatha all along. Thank you. I keep mixing it with Clarissa, but uh, yeah, like I think a lot of Marvel has become kind of soulless because it's kind of paint by numbers and just giving the fans what they want. And I think certainly a lot of the kind of formulaic movies we get are exactly that. And they're fun. They can definitely be enjoyable. But they're not art, I think, in the same kind of a way.
Yeah, so when it comes to like Marvel, Star Wars, To me, it's the studioification
Yeah.
of art or just like
Hmm.
television and movies. And maybe part of that is like them trying to triangulate on what fans want, but it's also just like studio execs decreeing things, and
Yeah.
then the artist, the director or the writers or whatever, are trying to make their vision like swerve and fit into what
Right.
their higher ups are telling them to do.
Hmm.
And I don't like that. You can definitely see it, you can feel it.
Yeah.
um and it's, I don't know. I think there are still good people doing good things, making good shows.
Yeah.
Agatha, I was a huge win, I think,
Hmm.
for the direction of Marvel. Like, and I don't know. We'll see what happens, because it does seem like the studio-ness is trying to take a step back.
Yep.
They have admitted the mistakes of the past couple of years and are refocusing on the television shows as television. I think
Hmm.
part of what went wrong is like movie people were making TV shows,
Yeah.
and so they were just like movies getting cut up into pieces.
Or they're often set up for the next movie, or yeah, all these
Yeah.
things. Well, and we're going to talk more about Agatha after all. We're going to talk more about Agatha all along in our bonus segment. But for anyone who wants to listen to that, wants to listen to more of our content, of course, think about becoming a member. It's only $5 a month, $55 a year. You get ad-free content, you get bonus content, you get full bonus episodes, and most of all, you get to help us keep the lights on and support us. And we're so very grateful. You are the thing that makes all of this possible. So if you can become a member, that's wonderful. If not, if you like this, share it with a friend. Ask someone else to listen to it. Give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcatcher. Do anything you want just to help get the word out, help more people find the show, and help us keeping you give more content. So, Riki, any last words you have on the show before we wrap up? The show or movie?
Watch it all.
Yeah.
Even if you partway through are like confused or it's not quite meeting your expectations. I mean, now you're spoiled to all of the stuff if you listen to this, but it's like the journey itself, even if you know it's going to happen, the journey is unbelievable.
Yeah, I'd very much agree with that. Very much agree. And I'm someone who, like, I got to some of those middle episodes and I was like, oh God, another fight with another angel.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it does drag a little,
Yeah.
because I mean, there's like 18 angels total or something like that.
But yeah, again, but the frustration you feel, that's part, like, in some way, it feels a very intentional journey, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, please check it out. Please become a member. Stick around for the bonus content. If you are, we have spoken. Welcome back to our members. We're going to keep this pretty short. I was thinking about if I wanted to do an episode on Agatha. Frankly, I think as two masculine people, we're not the best ones to do like a full commentary on this. And there's a couple of women I've been talking to about being on the show to talk about the episode. Hopefully, I'll get more than one. Frankly, because I think it's kind of like when we talked about the Barbie, kind of like why I didn't talk about the Barbie movies. I think my voice is probably not the one that's the most important in this conversation. But just as a brief bonus content, let's talk about it for a few minutes. Riki, what'd you think of it?
I watched it, and I loved it, and I was trying to figure out, is this my favorite Marvel TV show? Ultimately, I think not. I think Loki, and especially Loki season 2, is my favorite, and that's partly because I love time travel, and
Yeah.
it's just like hits a spot for me. There are some time travel-y elements to Agatha all along, but it isn't like based on time travel, like the
Yeah.
whole essence of it. But this is still like it's such a relief to have
Yeah.
the show, because like last year, Secret Invasion was, I'm just gonna say, it was like the worst Marvel thing.
Yeah. I've still not seen it.
Don't.
Yeah.
I anti-recommend that show, because if you love Marvel, like the MCU, if you love Marvel comics, it'll just make you angry. Like I was so angry. I
Yeah.
was like, what is this? What is going on? And Agatha is like the opposite of that. It's like, what is going on? Like
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what's going on. And then like they tell you, and it's like, oh, okay. and
Yeah.
like no spoilers, but just like it just makes I want to watch it again, like almost
Yeah.
immediately because of all this stuff. Like, oh, like I'm pretty sure I missed a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it really is gonna do well on rewatch.
Yeah.
I've only seen the last episode once, but I was watching week to week, and then a few weeks ago, my spouse and I watched everything that had come out, and then like last week watched the most recent. So I've kind of watched it twice. I do think that, like a lot of Marvel shows, it is much better watched all in one sitting than one at a time. But I would agree with you that I do think it's a very good show. It's almost definitely in my top three. It's in my top three, I think, for Marvel shows. And what I'll say is, I think better than almost every other Marvel show, except possibly, um, uh, let's rephrase that. And I think actually, if I think about what are my three favorites right now, this does what the other two I think also did well, which so many Marvel shows don't do, which is stick the ending. Like so many
Yes.
Marvel shows had a problem with the ending, and my two favorites, honestly, are Ms. Marvel and Echo. And even there, I think like Echo's ending could have been better. But I think Echo overall, it's just so much my story that I love it so much.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I'm
Yeah, I
obviously,
mean, in the same way, like time travel Loki was for me.
yeah, like
Like,
that speaks to you. That
there's definitely an element of like what you enjoy, like feeding into your like of something.
yeah,
And what I will say about Agatha is it may be the best constructed Marvel TV show. Like as a season of television, like
I think that's correct.
how they plotted and paced and like put all the elements together.
Yeah.
Like it just seems so deliberate in a satisfying way.
And I will say it had two big advantages over a lot of the other Marvel shows. One being that it wasn't dealing with a pandemic, because I think we forget that like a lot of those early shows were hurt
Yeah,
badly by how the pandemic changed them.
absolutely.
And also that, like we said, it wasn't really connected to a movie. Like it's a continuation of Wanda's story, and it references things from Doctor Strange and Mansions of Madness, but it's much more about like a follow up on the Agatha TV show. And as far as like I think the characters and the things that are introduced will appear in movies, but it didn't feel like they had to shoehorn things into the plot to set them up for a movie. It like you said, it felt like it was is made really on its own.
I think I disagree.
Okay.
Because but okay. I don't know. I don't want to mention specifics. What I will say is that the ending of this show to me more clearly indicates like a young Avengers coming
Yeah.
together.
The,
Like
the
and those characters have been seeded throughout a lot of things.
I guess maybe here's a better way to put it. The show is definitely the origin story of a character who we're going to see a lot more of in various Marvel content. I think it's that it doesn't feel forced. It felt very integrated into it felt like that was the plot in a very important way, a very important part of the plot, instead of it feeling tacked on the way it often can in other
Yeah,
things.
okay, that's fair, yeah. And I guess I'll be the one to say this.
Mhm.
As a hetero cis male, like this show was so gay in
Yeah.
like the best, most satisfying ways. Like it doesn't it doesn't matter to me and my identity, but I can appreciate that gay characters and stories have been suppressed
Hmm.
in a lot of media and in Marvel in ways that it's clear that they just wanted to be able to release something in China and like cut out one scene or
Yeah.
something like that, right? Like the Star Wars like End of Rise of Skywalker thing.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
can't cut it out of this. It
You
is
can't.
integral to the story and the characters. And
And
so I'm just like very glad that they've done this
mhm.
finally. And it's like, yeah, we're not going back.
Yeah. Like I definitely had a worry that this was going to be queer baiting again. And this is one spoiler. If you don't want to hear it, skip ahead 20 seconds. But they pay off one of the main same gender attractions that is built up the whole show in a way that really makes and but beyond, like, yes, there is one scene that you could cut out and it would not and it might not bother some people as much, but you're right, it's the whole thing is queer coded. There is same gender flirtation throughout the thing. There's references to it constantly. in both flirtatious ways, but also just like, oh, who was that person? Oh, they're my ex from a long time ago, or this person I dated, or a person who's interested in me. Like, it is just constant through the show, from numerous characters.
And
And
it and at least to me, it didn't seem like pandering. And I'm
yeah,
open to like hearing from queer people in the audience on whether they agree or disagree, because I don't, I
yeah,
don't know like how this feels, but it just seemed like it's not in your face. I mean, it was,
mhm,
but it's not. It was just like they exist. Queer
yeah,
people exist, and that's all that we all want is like for the media we watch to acknowledge that people like us exist in a normal way, in a normal like supernatural witchy way.
yeah. It it's only in your face in a way that, like, if you watch Iron Man, you are very aware that Tony Stark is attracted to women, and
Yeah,
that
exactly.
and it's
But
like
that's
that.
his character, and that's
Yeah,
normal.
but that doesn't feel in your face because we're just used to that with straight relationships.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to hear from others in the audience, and I'll certainly be doing some research and how others feel about it. I will just say I was watching it with a number of other queer folks. I'm obviously queer myself, bisexual, including a number of queer women or queer femme people. And when we got to the scene that confirmed that yes, this is not queer baiting, this is actually happening, like, we all cheered. We were all so happy about that.
Good.
And
I'm like very happy
do I
for
wish there was
y'all.
more than that one moment? Of course, but yeah, this is progress, and it's like Marvel is now up to step 3, while the rest of the world is on step 8. But still, it's a lot better than it was, and having it being made, yeah, it's better than we've gotten in a lot of other things. So,
And I'm gonna say this because I don't consider this a spoiler for like any of the plot or the show.
mhm,
One of the characters in their room has a trans flag
yeah,
that says "Trans Lives Matter,"
hmm,
and it's very consistent with this character and who they are. And to show that at this time, when unfortunately, like in the United States, there's so much hate and legislation.
yeah,
Like that was like a catharsis for me. And again, like I'm not trans, but I understand like the
no,
struggle. And for Marvel and Disney to show that on screen, it is like such a relief.
yeah. Um, there's two things I would say here. One, I mean, I totally get what you say about how that's not your struggle, but you get it because that's how I feel when you talk about Asian representation, and how I hope others feel when I talk about disability representation. Like, we all can have that instrument, that we can all have that empathy for each other.
Yeah.
And frankly, and I'm in kind of a weird position. Probably not many people who have this overlap, but some definitely do. And we just did an episode about it, who are watching both this show and the World Series or baseball playoffs this month. But
Yeah.
I was watching both, and if you're like us, probably, like, I don't watch much live TV. Most of what I watch is on streaming. And so I don't see many mainstream ads. And the World Series, as it is every 4 years in October, unfortunately, is just full of political advertisements. And there's a couple of there's a couple of Trump advertisements, and also for one Republican senatorial candidate, that are virulently anti-trans, and in ways where, just to talk about myself personally, I often say that, like, I feel kind of weird talking about trans issues because I am transgender, but when most people think of transgender people they hate, they don't mean me, because I don't come across that way. I use they them pronouns, but I still have a beard. I'm not cross-dressing as some people would define it, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a line in those ads that I've heard now, 2 different ads, where it says, Harris is for they them, Trump is for you. And that hits me really hard because it's a clear statement of, like, I am not you. I am not the regular American because I use they them pronouns. And I wept the first time I saw that trans flag because I'd been hearing those ads so much, and it just meant
Mhm.
so much hearing that against this background of all the hate and nonsense and horribleness that I've been listening to. So yeah, I'm really glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that is deeply important in the real world.
Yep.
And we on this show we talk about how the media we watch like reflects back on us or expresses something. And like I said, like this is Disney. like ultimately, right? Like the
Yeah.
company making this is Disney, and they have been so afraid, like making a company sound like a person, but like
No,
as
it's
a
true.
company, they have been afraid to express opinions on these issues sometimes.
Yep.
And yeah, it happened.
Yeah. And it happened in a way that didn't make it the focus of the story. Like it is integral to the story, but it feels organic to the story. Um, like I think most of the time it does. I think all this idea of, oh, they're just pushing woke bullshit into stuff. Like, no, it's often integral to the story. But here, like, if you have spent any time in pagan circles at all, you cannot tell a story of paganism and of witches or of any of that kind of thing without queerness becoming a big part of the conversation, because it's a
Mhm.
very big part of that population, not exclusively by any means, but a very big part of it. And yeah, so
And
yeah,
it makes 100% sense, like I said, for that
mhm,
character.
yep, yeah, it totally does. So yeah, just love the show. Definitely have my nitpicks about it. Want to listen to a lot of other people first though, because we haven't even talked about like the how much it's about a variety of female experience, because I think that's just not what I'm. I can talk about appreciating that. I probably will when we do a longer episode, but I think other voices are the ones that can speak more about it. But even from my perspective,
I mean,
and
I I appreciate, yeah, like I don't know what it's
mhm,
like. I appreciate that the coven
yeah,
had a black woman. It
yeah,
had an Asian woman. It had an elderly woman,
yeah,
right? Like it was such a different expression, I think, than what we're used to. Because like I grew up on The Craft and
yeah,
Charmed, and it's like here's like a bunch of young, beautiful white women as
yeah,
witches.
and they're all goths. They all wear
Yeah.
black fishnet. Yeah. No, and this was just such a different idea of that I really, and as someone who spent a lot of time in neo-pagan circles, I did a lot of research with that, and been in those communities for a long time, as part of my journey with seminary and things like that. This is a much better representation of that. So anyway, check that out. Check out Neon Genesis Evangelion. Please check out the stuff we talk about, and thank you so much. We have spoken. Cool. Well, and I will say thank you.